What happens when the most feared predator in the galaxy becomes completely helpless? When a creature that once commanded fleets of starships and brought entire civilizations to their knees suddenly can't even feed itself. The Zephyrians had always been apex predators, magnificent dragon-like beings whose very presence could shatter the morale of enemy forces. Their crystalline wings could slice through starship hulls, their breath could melt titanium, and their telepathic roars could drive lesser species insane with terror. For 3,000 years, they have been the undisputed rulers of the Andromeda Spiral. But war changes everything. When the Great Purge began, even the mighty Zephyrians found themselves outgunned, outnumbered, and systematically hunted to near extinction. Those who survived did so by running, hiding, or surrendering their pride to beg for mercy from species they had once considered beneath notice. Kethvar had chosen none of these options. As the last warlord of the Zephyrian Empire, he had made his final stand on a forgotten mining world called Terra 3, fighting until his wings were shattered, his fire was spent, and his telepathic voice was reduced to barely a whisper. His enemies left him there to die slowly. A fitting end, they thought, for a monster who had terrorized the galaxy for millennia. They never expected the humans to find him, and they certainly never expected what would happen next. This is the story of how the weakest species in the galaxy became its greatest hope, and how an act of simple kindness toward a dying enemy would reshape the balance of power among the stars forever. Sometimes the smallest gestures create the biggest storms. The mining station on Terra 3 hummed with the quiet efficiency that marked all human operations in the Outer Rim. Sarah Chun wiped sweat from her forehead as she checked the atmospheric readings on her tablet. Another 16-hour shift in the tunnels. Another day closer to earning enough credits to get off this rock and maybe find somewhere that didn't smell like sulfur and machine oil. Terra 3 wasn't much to look at from space, just another brown ball of dirt and metal orbiting a dying star. But its core was rich with rare Earth elements that kept the human colonies running, which meant there was always work for people willing to dig deep and ask few questions about why they were so far from civilized space. Sarah had been asking fewer questions lately. Ever since the news feed started carrying reports about something called the Great Purge happening in the inner systems, most folks on Terra 3 figured that being forgotten was probably safer than being noticed. The galaxy was a big place, and humans had learned long ago that keeping a low profile was often the difference between surviving and becoming someone else's problem to solve. The comm system crackled to life as Sarah made her way back to the main habitat dome. All surface crews, we've got movement in Sector 7. Probably another meteor shower, but protocol says we check it out. Chun, you're closest. Mind taking a look? Sarah sighed and adjusted her environmental suit. Sector 7 was on the far side of the mining complex, where the old excavation sites had been abandoned after they played out. Nothing but empty tunnels and scrap metal out there, but regulations were regulations. The mining company had very specific ideas about investigating anomalies, especially after the incident on Kepler 442, where a meteor shower had turned out to be pirate raiders using the mining station for target practice. The walk to Sector 7 took her through the graveyard of old machinery that surrounded the active mining site. Massive excavators sat rusting in the thin atmosphere, their power cells long since stripped for parts. Solar collectors that had once powered the early operations now served mainly as nesting sites for the local scavenger birds. Ugly little things that looked like a cross between a bat and a vulture. The scavengers were what made Sarah notice something was wrong. Usually they were everywhere in the equipment graveyard, fighting over scraps of food left behind by careless workers or bits of organic matter in the machinery lubricants. But as she approached Sector 7, the birds were gone. Not just quiet, completely absent. Even the insects that normally buzzed around the machinery had vanished. Sarah checked her radiation detector, but the readings were normal. Air quality was standard for Terra 3, which meant barely breathable, but not immediately toxic. Temperature was holding steady at -12 Celsius. Nothing that should have scared off the local wildlife. She was about to report back that Sector 7 was clear when she heard it. A sound like wind moving through broken glass. So faint she almost missed it. Sarah stopped walking and listened carefully. There it was again, coming from somewhere beyond the ridge where the old mining tunnels opened onto the surface. Against her better judgment, Sarah climbed the ridge. What she found on the other side made her forget every safety protocol she'd ever learned. The creature was massive, easily 20 meters from nose to tail, with scales that shifted color like oil on water, even though most of them were cracked or missing entirely. Its wings, or what was left of them, were spread across the rocky ground like broken umbrellas. Crystalline membranes shattered into fragments that caught the weak sunlight and threw rainbows across the stone. One of its legs was bent at an impossible angle, and dark fluid that might have been blood had pooled beneath its body. But it was alive. Sarah could see the slow rise and fall of its chest, could hear that glass wind breathing that had led her to the ridge in the first place. As she watched, one massive eye opened, an eye like liquid silver that seemed to hold depths she couldn't fathom. The creature looked at her for a long moment, and Sarah felt something brush against her mind. Not painful, exactly, but startling, like having someone whisper her name in a language she didn't recognize. Then, the eye closed again, and the creature's breathing grew more labored. Sarah's hands shook as she activated her comm unit. "Base, this is Chun. I need emergency medical support in Sector 7. We've got a situation." "Define situation, Chun. Are you in danger?" Sarah looked at the broken creature in front of her. It could probably have swallowed her whole if it wanted to, but something in that silver gaze had seemed almost pleading. "No danger, but I'm gonna need Doc Martinez out here, and probably a heavy lifter. Maybe two." "Chun, you're breaking up. Did you say you need medical?" "Affirmative." "And Base? You're going to want to see this for yourself." While she waited for the medical team to arrive, Sarah found herself moving closer to the creature. Up close, she could see that its scales weren't just damaged. They'd been deliberately shattered in places, as if someone had taken great care to ensure that it suffered as much as possible. Burn marks along its flanks suggested weapons fire, and the way its wings were positioned made her think they'd been broken systematically, bone by bone. Someone had done this intentionally. Someone had wanted this creature to suffer. The thought made Sarah angry in a way she couldn't quite explain. She'd seen plenty of cruelty in her 32 years. The galaxy was full of people who found entertainment in others' pain. But there was something different about this. Something that felt personal and deliberately vicious. "Easy there," she said softly, not sure if the creature could understand her. "Help's coming." The silver eye opened again, and this time the mental touch was clearer. Not words exactly, but concepts. Pain, confusion, and underneath it all, a profound sense of abandonment, the feeling of someone who had been deliberately left behind to die alone. Sarah reached out slowly and placed her hand on one of the intact scales near the creature's head. The scale was warm, warmer than the ambient temperature should have allowed, and she could feel a faint vibration that might have been a heartbeat. "You're not alone now," she said. 20 minutes later, Dr. Elena Martinez arrived with half the off-duty mining crew in tow. Elena was a good doctor, had to be working medical on a mining station where the nearest hospital was 3-star systems away, but Sarah could see her struggling to process what she was looking at. "Sarah, what the hell is that thing?" "I don't know, but it's hurt badly and it's intelligent. It tried to communicate with me telepathically." Elena pulled out her medical scanner and ran it over the creature's body, frowning at the readings. "I'm getting life signs, but nothing that matches any known physiology. Heart rate is slow, but steady. Brain activity is off the charts, and the body temperature is running about 15 degrees warmer than it should be in this environment. Can you help it?" "I don't know. I need to understand its biology first, and that could take days or weeks." "But Sarah..." Elena paused and looked at the extent of the creature's injuries. "Even if I knew exactly how to treat it, I'm not sure there's anything we can do. These injuries aren't just severe, they're systematic. Someone wanted this thing to die slowly. Then, we make sure that doesn't happen. Elena stared at her. Sarah, this could be dangerous. We don't know what it is or where it came from. For all we know, it's some kind of weapon that got loose. Sarah looked down at the creature's face. Even unconscious, there was something noble about it. Something that reminded her of pictures she'd seen of Earth's ancient dragons, if dragons had been real, and made of living crystal and starlight. Look at it, Elena. Really look at it. Does this seem like a weapon to you? Elena knelt beside the creature and gently examined one of the wing fragments. The crystalline material was incredibly complex, not just broken, but fractured in patterns that suggested it had once been capable of incredible precision and beauty. No, she said quietly. This seems like art, like someone took apart a work of art piece by piece. So we help it. It could take everything we have, medical supplies, power, food, and that's assuming we can even figure out what it needs to survive. The mining company isn't going to approve resources for this. Sarah smiled grimly. Then we don't ask them. Over the next several hours, the mining crew of Terra 3 accomplished something that would have been impossible in any civilized system. Without authorization, without proper equipment, and certainly without any idea what they were doing, they moved a 20-meter alien dragon into the abandoned mining tunnel that Elena had designated as a makeshift medical facility. It took 3 heavy lifters working in tandem, enough power cable to light a small city, and every medical monitor the station possessed. By the time they had the creature stable and connected to Elena's improvised life support system, half the crew was exhausted and the other half was convinced they'd all lost their minds. But the creature was alive, and that was what mattered. Sarah volunteered for the first watch, settling into a chair beside the makeshift medical bed they'd constructed from mining equipment and spare hull plating. The creature's breathing had stabilized, and the life support monitors showed steady vital signs, even if nobody really understood what they were measuring. Around midnight, station time, the creature opened its eyes again. This time the mental contact was stronger, clearer. Not words, but images and emotions that flooded Sarah's mind with surprising gentleness. She saw star systems she didn't recognize, vast cities floating in space, creatures like this one soaring between ships in formation that looked almost like a dance. Then, the images changed. Darker now, battle scenes, explosions, the same graceful creatures falling from the sky like broken birds. The overwhelming sense of loss and defeat, of watching everything beautiful in the universe get systematically destroyed by something cold and relentless. And finally, the memory of being left behind. Not just abandoned, deliberately left to suffer by people who had once been allies. Sarah felt tears she didn't know she'd been holding back start to flow down her cheeks. "Who did this to you?" she whispered. The answer came not in images, but in something that felt like a name or maybe a title. HFY. And with it, the knowledge that this was not just any creature, this was someone important. Someone who had once been powerful and proud, now reduced to depending on the kindness of strangers just to stay alive. HFY, Sarah said aloud, testing the way it felt in her mouth. The creature's eye brightened slightly, and she felt a wave of gratitude that was almost overwhelming in its intensity. "Well, HFY, I'm Sarah, and I don't know who left you here or why, but you're safe now. We're going to take care of you." The gratitude deepened, mixed with something that felt like disbelief. As if the concept of being cared for by strangers was foreign and wonderful and slightly terrifying all at once. Sarah settled back in her chair for the long watch ahead. Outside the tunnel, Terra 3 continued its slow rotation around its dying star, and somewhere in the darkness between systems, the Great Purge continued its relentless advance toward the outer rim. But in a makeshift medical facility powered by mining equipment and staffed by people who had no idea what they were doing, something small and important had changed in the balance of the galaxy. They had chosen kindness over fear, compassion over safety. And sometimes that makes all the difference. 3 weeks after finding HFY, Sarah had learned more about alien physiology than she'd ever wanted to know. The dragon's biology was a nightmare of complexity. Multiple hearts, crystalline bone structures that conducted both electricity and some kind of energy she couldn't identify, and a nervous system that seemed to extend into the wing membranes in ways that defied everything she thought she knew about anatomy. Elena had taken to sleeping in the medical tunnel, surrounded by jury-rigged monitoring equipment and medical texts she'd downloaded from every database the mining station could access. The company's medical AI had been helpful to a point, but eventually every query came back with the same response: insufficient data for meaningful analysis. His core temperature is dropping again, Elena said, adjusting the thermal regulators they'd built from mining suit heaters. I think the wing damage is affecting his ability to regulate body heat. In his species, the wings might be more than just flight organs. Sarah nodded, watching Kethvar's breathing pattern. She'd learned to read the subtle changes that indicated pain, confusion, or the rare moments when he seemed comfortable. Have you figured out the dietary requirements yet? Partially. He's definitely carnivorous, but it's not just about protein. He needs specific minerals, things like iridium and palladium that are common in space but rare in biological systems. I think his species evolved in an environment with much higher concentrations of heavy elements, which we happen to mine here. Exactly. Pure luck that we're on a planet rich in exactly what he needs. Elena paused in her equipment checks and looked at Sarah seriously. But, Sarah, we need to talk about the bigger picture here. Word is getting out about what we found. Sarah felt a cold knot form in her stomach. They'd been careful to keep Kethvar's presence secret from the mining company's management, but in a facility with only 43 people, secrets didn't stay secret for long. How bad is it? Marcus sent a message to corporate yesterday. Unofficial channels, but still. He's worried about liability if this thing turns out to be dangerous. Marcus is an idiot. Maybe, but he's an idiot with connections to the Home Office. And, Sarah, I've been doing some research on that telepathic communication ability. The few references I can find suggest that Kethvar species might be what the galactic community calls Zephyrians. The name meant nothing to Sarah, but Elena's expression suggested it should. Should I be concerned? Very. If the historical records are accurate, the Zephyrians were one of the most feared species in the galaxy. They controlled an empire that spanned dozens of star systems, and they were known for not being particularly nice to other species. Sarah looked at Kethvar, who was currently unconscious and looking about as threatening as a house cat with broken legs. This guy might have been what the records call a warlord. If I'm reading the physiological markers correctly, he's old, maybe centuries old, and the scars on his scales suggest he's been in more battles than I can count. So what are you saying? Elena sat down heavily in the chair beside Kethvar's bed. I'm saying that we might be caring for someone who is personally responsible for enslaving or killing millions of beings. And if the wrong people find out he's here, they're going to want him dead. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Finally, she reached out and placed her hand on one of Kethvar's intact scales, feeling the warmth and the slow pulse of his heartbeat. Have you told him any of this? How can I? His telepathic ability is still too weak for complex communication. Then we wait. We help him recover, and when he's strong enough, we ask him directly. Sarah looked at Elena steadily. Because I don't care what he might have done in the past. Right now, he's hurt and alone and depending on us for survival. That's what matters. Elena shook her head. Sarah, you're thinking with your heart instead of your head. If the galactic authorities find out we're harboring a war criminal, then we make sure they don't find out. Their conversation was interrupted by a low rumbling sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Both women looked around in alarm before realizing that the sound was coming from Kethvar himself. A deep, harmonic vibration that made the medical equipment hum in sympathy. Kethvar's eyes opened, and for the first time since they'd found him, Sarah felt the full force of his telepathic presence in her mind. Not the weak, desperate whispers she'd grown used to, but something powerful and controlled and utterly alien. The mental voice was like hearing thunder speak. Who dares to judge what I have done? Elena gasped and staggered backward, but Sarah held her ground. Someone who spent 3 weeks keeping you alive, she said aloud. Someone who deserves some answers. The telepathic presence paused, and Sarah felt Kethvar examining her thoughts with surprising gentleness. When he spoke again, the mental voice was quieter, more careful. You know what I am. I know what Elena thinks you might be. I know that your species apparently had a reputation for violence. But I also know that someone left you here to die slowly, and that doesn't happen to people who are universally loved. Again, the pause, longer this time. Sarah could feel Kethvar thinking, weighing his words carefully. I was the last warlord of the Zephyrian Empire. I commanded fleets that brought star systems to their knees. I made decisions that resulted in the deaths of billions of beings across dozens of worlds. Elena made a small, frightened sound, but Sarah didn't move. Why? The question seemed to surprise Kethvar. Why? Why did you do those things? Were you evil? Were you defending something? Were you following orders? Why? For the first time, Sarah felt uncertainty in the telepathic contact, as if Kethvar had expected accusations or demands, but not simple questions about motivation. We were defending our way of life, he said finally. Other species wanted to expand into territories we had claimed. They wanted resources we needed for our survival. They wanted to change us, to make us conform to their ideas of civilization. So you fought back. We conquered them first. It seemed more efficient. Sarah nodded slowly. And now? Now my species is extinct. Our empire is dust. Our worlds are occupied by the same beings we once conquered, and they hunt the few survivors with a dedication that borders on religious fervor. The Great Purge. You know of it? We get news feeds out here. Reports about a systematic campaign to eliminate dangerous species from the galaxy. Very clinical language, very official sounding. They make it sound like pest control. The telepathic presence grew colder, more bitter. That is precisely what it is. The Galactic Council has decided that certain species are too dangerous to be allowed to exist. They hunt us down with scientific precision, offering rewards for our capture and experimenting on us to understand our abilities before they execute us. Sarah felt sick. And your own people? The ones who left you here? The bitterness in Kethvar's mental voice became almost overwhelming. Zephyrians who survive by surrendering to the Council. They betray others of our kind in exchange for protection. They left me here because my death would prove their loyalty to their new masters. Elena spoke up from where she'd been listening in horror. If that's true, then helping you could bring the Council down on all of us. Sarah turned to look at her friend. And we're talking about 43 mining workers against the most powerful military force in the galaxy. I don't care. Both Elena and Kethvar stared at her. Elena in disbelief, Kethvar with something that might have been curiosity. I don't care, Sarah repeated. Maybe Kethvar did terrible things in the past. Maybe helping him is going to get us all killed. But right now, in this moment, we have a choice. We can choose to be the kind of people who abandon someone who needs help, or we can choose to be better than that. Elena shook her head. Sarah, this isn't about being better. This is about survival. If the Council finds out, then we make sure they don't. Sarah looked back at Kethvar. How long before you're strong enough to leave? The dragon's mental voice was puzzled. You would help me escape? I would help you recover. What you do after that is up to you. Why? It was Sarah's turn to pause and think. Why was she willing to risk everything for a creature she'd known for 3 weeks? Why was she prepared to defy the most powerful authority in the galaxy for someone who admitted to being responsible for billions of deaths? Because, she said finally, the people who left you here to die slowly wanted you to suffer. They wanted you to be afraid and alone and in pain. And I refuse to be the kind of person who helps that happen, even by accident. The telepathic presence was silent for a long moment. Then, quietly, you are either very brave or very foolish. Probably both. Kethvar's mental voice carried the faintest hint of what might have been humor. In my experience, there's often little difference between the two. Over the following days, Kethvar's recovery accelerated dramatically. Whether it was the improvement in his diet, the stabilization of his environment, or simply the psychological effect of feeling safe, his broken bones began to knit with startling speed. The damaged wing membranes couldn't be fully repaired without surgical intervention they weren't equipped to provide, but Elena managed to stabilize them enough that he could move without constant pain. More importantly, his telepathic abilities grew stronger each day. Soon he was able to communicate not just with Sarah and Elena, but with anyone on the mining station who was willing to listen. And, to everyone's surprise, most of them were. It turned out that Marcus was the only one who'd actually reported Kethvar's presence to corporate, and he'd done so reluctantly after being pressured by regulations he couldn't ignore. The rest of the crew had quietly decided that what happened in the Outer Rim stayed in the Outer Rim, especially when it involved helping someone who'd been obviously tortured and abandoned. Tom Bradley, the station's chief engineer, spent hours discussing propulsion theory with Kethvar, fascinated by the Dragon's descriptions of bioelectric flight systems that could work in both atmosphere and vacuum. Dr. Martinez found herself learning more about energy metabolism in 3 days than she'd learned in 4 years of medical school. Even the normally antisocial mining crew discovered that Kethvar had a dry sense of humor and an apparently infinite number of stories about the strange places he'd been in his centuries of life. But it was Sarah who spent the most time with him, often sitting in a medical tunnel during her off hours, sharing stories about human culture and asking questions about Zephyrian history that Kethvar seemed genuinely glad to answer. "Were you really as cruel as the records suggest?" she asked one evening as she helped Elena change the dressings on his wing joints. Kethvar considered the question seriously. By human standards, yes. We saw other species as either resources to be exploited or obstacles to be removed. We had no concept of equality between species, no understanding that others might have valid claims to territory or resources. But you understand it now? Lying here helpless while beings I would once have considered prey work tirelessly to keep me alive has been educational. Sarah smiled. And if you could go back and change things, I would make the same decisions, Kethvar said without hesitation. But I would make them for better reasons. What does that mean? It means I would protect my people and secure their future, but I would not take pleasure in the suffering of others. I would not mistake cruelty for strength or conquest for achievement. I would remember that every being I defeated was someone else's family member, someone else's friend. Sarah nodded, understanding. The difference between necessary violence and unnecessary cruelty. Exactly. And now, if you recover completely, what will you do? Kethvar was quiet for a long time. Finally, I do not know. My people are gone, my empire is dust, and I am too old and too damaged to start over. Perhaps I will find a quiet place to wait for death with dignity. Or perhaps, Sarah said quietly, you'll find something new to protect. The dragon's silver eyes fixed on her with surprising intensity. What could an old warlord possibly protect in this new galaxy? Sarah gestured around the medical tunnel, where Elena was calibrating equipment that had been cobbled together from mining gear and spare parts, where monitors showed the vital signs of a creature that should have been dead 3 weeks ago, where the impossible had become routine through sheer stubborn kindness. The things that matter, she said. The attack came at dawn, station time. Sarah was in the medical tunnel, checking Kethvar's morning vitals when the proximity alarms began screaming throughout the mining facility. She looked up from her tablet to see the dragon's eyes snap open, his mental presence suddenly sharp and focused in a way that made her teeth ache. "Sarah," Elena's voice crackled over the comm system, tight with fear. "We got ships incoming. Military configuration, broadcasting Galactic Council authorization codes." Sarah felt her blood turn to ice water. "How many?" 3 vessels. Destroyer class. They're demanding immediate surrender and compliance with Council Directive 847. Kethvar's telepathic voice filled Sarah's mind with sudden urgency. Directive 847 is the official authorization for Xenocide operations. They are here to kill me and anyone who has helped me. How long do we have? Sarah asked, both aloud and in her thoughts. Elena's voice came back over the comm. They're taking up orbital positions now. Standard blockade formation. I'd say maybe 10 minutes before they start landing troops. Through their telepathic connection, Sarah felt Kethvar assessing his physical condition with the ruthless efficiency of someone who had survived hundreds of battles. His prognosis was not encouraging. Wings still too damaged for flight, multiple fractures barely healed, and muscle mass depleted from weeks of bed rest. I cannot defend myself, let alone protect any of you, he told Sarah. You must surrender me to them. It is the only way to save your people. Like hell. Sarah keyed her comm unit to the station-wide frequency. All crew, emergency protocol 7. We've got unfriendly visitors incoming, and they're here for our patient. I need volunteers for defense preparation, and I need everyone else in the deep tunnels within 5 minutes. Sarah, Elena's voice was desperate now. You can't be serious. We're miners, not soldiers. These are military ships with trained troops and advanced weapons. Then, we better be creative. Sarah looked at Kethvar, who was struggling to sit upright despite Elena's protests. Can you access the mining station's computer systems? Why? Because you're about to give me a crash course in fighting smart instead of fighting fair. The first thing Kethvar taught her was that every mining station was essentially a fortress, if you knew how to use it properly. Within minutes of linking his telepathic abilities to the station's computer network, he had mapped every tunnel, every piece of equipment, and every potential weapon the facility contained. Tom, Sarah called over the comm, I need you to reroute power from the mining lasers to the communications array. Maximum gain focus beam. Sarah, that'll fry our transmitter. That's the idea. Elena, how much blasting explosive do we have in storage? About 2 tons of industrial charges, but Sarah, perfect. Get half the crew moving that to Tunnel Junction 7. The rest of you, I need the automated mining crawlers reprogrammed for remote operation. Through their mental link, Kethvar was feeding Sarah tactical information faster than she could process it. Weak points in destroyer-class ships, standard Council military protocols, the most effective ways to use industrial equipment as weapons. It was like having a military academy education downloaded directly into her brain. The first shuttle landed 8 minutes later, disgorging 20 armed troops in full environmental suits. They moved with the practiced efficiency of soldiers who had done this many times before, establishing a perimeter around their landing craft and advancing on the main habitat dome in textbook formation. They walked directly into the trap Sarah and Kethvar had prepared. The mining station's external lights suddenly blazed to life with 10 times their normal intensity, powered by the redirected mining laser array. The soldiers' suit sensors overloaded instantly, leaving them effectively blind just as the first automated mining crawler erupted from the tunnel entrance behind them. The crawler had been designed to cut through solid rock, but it worked equally well on military equipment. The soldiers scrambled for cover as the massive machine chewed through their landing shuttle, its cutting arms slicing through armored hull plating like paper. This is Council Strike Force Alpha to Mining Station Terra 3. A voice crackled over the emergency frequency. You are in violation of Galactic Council directives. Surrender immediately or face the consequences. Sarah keyed the comm with one hand while using the other to direct their improvised defenses. This is Station Manager Sarah Chun. You are in violation of territorial mining rights and the Colonial Protection Act. Withdraw immediately or face counter-battery fire. There was a pause. Mining Station, you cannot seriously believe you can resist a Council military operation. Try us. The second wave of attackers approached more carefully, using sensor drones and electronic countermeasures to avoid the tricks that had destroyed the first shuttle. But Kethvar had spent centuries learning how to adapt to changing battlefield conditions, and he was teaching Sarah to think 3 moves ahead. When the soldiers reached the main entrance to the habitat dome, they found the airlock sealed and apparently undefended. The moment they began cutting through the outer door, Sarah triggered the industrial charges that Tom's crew had placed throughout the tunnel system. The explosion was carefully calculated, not enough to damage the main habitat, but more than enough to collapse the approach tunnels and trap the soldiers between locked doors and tons of fallen rock. By the time they dug their way out, Sarah's people would be long gone. But Sarah wasn't planning to run. "Elena," she called over the comm, "how's our guest doing?" "Stable, but, Sarah, we can't move him in his condition. The stress could kill him." "Then, we don't move him," HFY said in her mind. "We make them come to us." "What do you mean?" "Show me your mining laser control systems." Sarah pulled up the relevant displays on her tablet, sharing the visual data through their telepathic link. She felt HFY's mind working through the technical specifications, calculating power outputs, and targeting solutions with the speed of a natural-born weapons designer. "Your mining lasers are more powerful than the point defense systems on those destroyers," he told her. "And they have one critical advantage, which is they are not designed for ship-to-ship combat. The Council forces will not expect you to use them as weapons, because doing so would be impossible for most species. But not for Zephyrians. Not for someone who understands how to modulate energy frequencies in real time. But, Sarah, if we do this, there will be no hiding what I am. The entire galaxy will know that humans sheltered a Zephyrian warlord." Sarah looked around the medical tunnel, where she'd spent the last month learning to care for a creature that most of the galaxy considered monster. Elena was working frantically to stabilize HFY's life support systems. Tom's voice crackled over the comm as he reported on defensive preparations. 43 people who had chosen to risk everything rather than abandon someone who needed their help. "Let them know," she said. "Let the whole galaxy know that when they left you here to die, they made a mistake." The transformation of Terra 3's mining equipment into a fortress defense system took exactly 14 minutes. Under HFY's guidance, Sarah's crew rewired power conduits, realigned sensor arrays, and converted industrial cutting tools into precision weapons that could target objects in orbit. The first blast from the modified mining laser caught the lead destroyer completely by surprise, punching through its shields and opening a gaping hole in its forward hull. The ship's automated systems screamed warnings about impossible energy signatures as its crew struggled to understand how a mining station could produce focused energy beams more powerful than their own weapons. The second blast crippled the destroyer's propulsion system. The third destroyed it completely. "Council Strike Force Alpha to Terra 3. The voice on the emergency frequency was no longer calm. "You have just destroyed a Galactic Council vessel. You are now in direct violation of..." "This is Terra 3 to Council Strike Force Alpha," Sarah interrupted. "You have just attempted to murder civilians under the protection of colonial mining rights. Withdraw immediately, or we'll demonstrate that the first shot wasn't lucky." The remaining 2 destroyers began targeting the mining station with their own weapons, but HFY had anticipated this. The station's defensive shields, normally used to deflect asteroid impacts, had been reconfigured to disperse energy weapons fire. And the mining complex itself was buried so deep in the planet's crust that only direct orbital bombardment could reach it. Bombardment that would destroy the evidence the Council needed to justify their actions. For 6 hours, the battle raged above Terra 3. The Council forces tried everything: electronic warfare, kinetic bombardment, even landing additional troops in powered armor. But every attack was met with responses that seemed impossibly sophisticated for a simple mining operation. Because behind every defensive strategy, every perfectly timed counterattack, every adaptation to new Council tactics, was the mind of someone who had fought and won battles across dozens of star systems. HFY might be physically broken, but his tactical genius was intact, and he was channeling it through 43 humans who had decided that doing the right thing was more important than doing the safe thing. Finally, As Terra 3's improvised weapons destroyed the second destroyer, the remaining Council ship withdrew to a safe distance and opened a communication channel. Terra 3, this is Admiral Thexkar of the Galactic Council Navy. We know you are harboring the war criminal Kethvar. Surrender him immediately, and we will guarantee safe passage for all human personnel. Sarah looked at Kethvar, who was watching the tactical displays with the focused intensity of a master craftsman examining his finest work. Your call, she said. Kethvar's mental voice was thoughtful. Admiral Thexkar. I remember him. Young, ambitious, completely convinced of his own righteousness. He was one of the ones who voted to authorize the Great Purge. So he has made a career out of hunting down the survivors of extinct species. He enjoys his work. Sarah keyed the comm. Admiral Thexkar, this is Station Manager Sarah Chun. I'm not harboring anyone. I'm providing medical assistance to an injured being in accordance with standard humanitarian protocols. That being is a Zephyrian warlord responsible for the deaths of billions. That being, Sarah said, cutting him off, is a patient under my care. And as long as he needs medical assistance, he stays under my protection. You cannot seriously believe, Admiral. Sarah's voice was deadly calm. In the last 6 hours, you've watched 43 miners and a broken-down mining station destroy 2 of your destroyers and send you running like a scared child. Do you really want to test what we can do if you keep threatening our patient? The comm was silent for a long moment. Finally, this is not over, Station Manager Chun. No, Sarah said, watching the Council ship accelerate away from Terra 3. I don't think it is. Kethvar's telepathic voice was filled with something that might have been wonder. In 3,000 years of warfare, I have never seen anything like what your people just accomplished. What's that? You took a hopeless defensive position against overwhelmingly superior forces, and you won. Not through superior technology or numbers, but through pure determination to protect something you believed was worth protecting. Sarah smiled, exhausted but triumphant. Welcome to humanity, Kethvar. We're very stubborn when we think we're right. But even as she celebrated their victory, Sarah knew that Kethvar was correct about one thing. This wasn't over. Word of what had happened at Terra 3 would spread throughout the galaxy. The story of humans who had sheltered a Zephyrian warlord and fought off the Galactic Council would reach every species, every system, every corner of civilized space. And everything would change. 6 months after the Battle of Terra 3, Sarah stood on the observation deck of the refitted mining station and watched ships arrive from across the galaxy. Freighters, passenger vessels, even a few military craft flying flags she didn't recognize, all converging on a small mining world that had suddenly become the most important place in known space. The transformation had been remarkable. What started as a simple mining operation had evolved into something unprecedented. A neutral zone where species that had been enemies for centuries could meet safely, protected by the most unlikely alliance in galactic history. The Altarian delegation just docked, Elena reported, consulting her tablet as she joined Sarah at the observation window. That makes representatives from 47 different species now on station. I never thought I'd live to see Altarians and Centaurans in the same room without shooting at each other. Sarah nodded, watching a sleek diplomatic transport maneuver toward the newly constructed docking bay. The ship's hull bore the distinctive crystalline patterns that marked it as Zephyrian in origin, though the crew was almost certainly human. Any word from Kethvar? He's in conference with the Tau Ceti resistance leaders. Something about coordinating supply lines for refugee camps. Elena Pozud. Sarah, are you sure we know what we're doing here? 6 months ago, we were miners. Now we're apparently running an interstellar diplomatic mission. We're doing what we've always done, Sarah said. Taking care of people who need help. It had started small. Word of Terra 3's successful defense against the Galactic Council had spread through the underground networks that connected rebel cells, refugee groups, and resistance movements across the galaxy. Species that had been targeted by the Great Purge began sending messages, asking if the humans who had protected Kethvar would extend that same protection to others. Sarah's answer had been simple. Anyone who needed sanctuary was welcome, as long as they came in peace. The response had been overwhelming. Within weeks, Terra 3 was receiving refugees from a dozen different species, survivors of worlds that had been cleansed by Council forces, members of resistance groups that had been scattered by military action, and individuals whose only crime had been belonging to species that the Council considered dangerous. But the refugees brought more than just stories of survival. They brought knowledge, skills, and most importantly, hope. Kethvar had been the catalyst for everything that followed. His recovery had been slow, but steady, and as his strength returned, so did his ability to coordinate resistance efforts across multiple star systems. He couldn't fly. His wings would never fully heal, but his tactical genius and centuries of military experience made him invaluable as a strategic coordinator. More importantly, his presence on Terra 3 sent a message that resonated throughout the galaxy. If humans were willing to protect even a former enemy, they could be trusted to keep their word about sanctuary. Sarah, Tom Bradley's voice crackled over the comm system. We're getting a priority transmission from the outer perimeter. Long-range sensors are picking up a Council fleet approaching. Looks like Admiral Thexkar is back, and this time he brought friends. Sarah felt a familiar knot of tension form in her stomach. They'd known this day would come eventually. Terra 3 had become too important, too visible for the Council to ignore indefinitely. How many ships? 47 vessels. Full battle fleet configuration with siege weapons. Elena grabbed Sarah's arm. Sarah, we can't fight a fleet that size. Our defenses worked against 3 destroyers, but this I know. Sarah activated her personal comm unit. Kethvar, we need you in the command center. Now, the command center of Terra 3 had grown far beyond its origins as a mining station control room. Banks of communication equipment connected them to resistance cells throughout the galaxy. Tactical displays showed the positions of friendly and hostile forces across dozens of star systems, and diplomatic channels carried negotiations that could affect the balance of power for entire civilizations. Kethvar was waiting when Sarah arrived, his massive form somehow managing to look both regal and practical despite the permanent damage to his wings. Around him, representatives from a dozen different species worked together with a kind of cooperation that had been impossible just months before. Admiral Thexkar has finally decided to end this, Kethvar said without preamble. His fleet is powerful enough to crack this planet's crust if necessary. He will not make the mistake of underestimating us again. Options? Sarah asked. Fight and die gloriously, or surrender and die slowly. Kethvar's mental voice carried a grim humor. Neither appeals to me particularly. Sarah studied the tactical display, watching the approach vectors of the Council fleet. 47 ships, all of them larger and more heavily armed than anything Terra 3 could field. Even with Kethvar's tactical expertise and the improvised weapons they developed, the math was simple. They were outgunned by a factor of approximately 50 to 1. What if we don't fight them directly? She said slowly. Kethvar's attention focused on her with laser intensity. Explain. You've been coordinating resistance activities for months now. How many ships do our allies have scattered across this sector? Perhaps 100 vessels, but they're mostly civilian craft or light patrol ships. Nothing that could stand against a Council battle fleet. But if they all arrived at the same time, understanding dawned in Kethvar's silver eyes. Through their mental link, Sarah felt him rapidly calculating trajectories, arrival times, and tactical possibilities. It would not be a battle, he said finally. It will be a statement. The biggest statement in galactic history, Sarah agreed. Over the next hour, messages went out through every communication channel Terra 3 could access. To resistance cells on occupied worlds, to refugee fleets hiding in asteroid belts, to independent traders who had been secretly ferrying supplies to rebel groups. The message was simple. Come to Terra 3, come now, and come ready to make history. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Ships began dropping out of hyperspace around Terra 3 within minutes of the call going out. First dozens, then hundreds, then thousands. Freighters flying rebel colors. Passenger ships carrying survivors from destroyed worlds. Even a few military vessels from species that had managed to preserve small fleets despite the purge. By the time Admiral Thexgar's battle fleet reached Terra 3, they found themselves facing something unprecedented in galactic history. An armada of over 3,000 ships representing 49 different species, all united in defense of a single principle. This is Admiral Thexgar of the Galactic Council Navy. The transmission came through clearly on all frequencies. You are all in violation of Council authority. Disperse immediately or face the consequences. Sarah keyed the response personally. Admiral, this is Station Manager Sarah Chun. You are in violation of the territorial space of Sovereign World. Withdraw immediately or discover why humans don't like bullies. Station Manager Chun, you cannot seriously believe that this mob of refugees and criminals can stand against the authorized military force of the Galactic Council. Admiral, Sarah said, looking at the tactical display where 3,000 ships from across the galaxy hung in perfect formation around Terra 3. 6 months ago, you said the same thing about 43 miners. How did that work out for you? The Council fleet held position for several hours, clearly uncertain how to proceed. They had come prepared to besiege a single mining station, not to fight what amounted to the largest combined fleet in recorded galactic history. More importantly, they faced a political nightmare. Any attack on the Terra 3 fleet would be seen throughout the galaxy as the Council attacking refugees and civilians who had committed no crime except seeking sanctuary. Finally, a new voice came over the communication channel. Not Admiral Thexgar, but someone Sarah recognized from news broadcasts, Counselor Vextai, one of the most powerful political figures in the galactic government. Station Manager Chun, I am Counselor Vextai of the Galactic Council. I am authorized to offer terms for a peaceful resolution to this situation. Sarah exchanged glances with Kethvar, who nodded slightly. I am listening, Counselor. The Council is prepared to recognize Terra 3 as a neutral zone, with limited autonomy in exchange for the surrender of the war criminal Kethvar and the dissolution of your unauthorized fleet. Counterproposal, Sarah said without hesitation. The Council recognizes Terra 3 as a fully independent sovereign world with the right to offer sanctuary to any being who requests it. In exchange, we won't tell the entire galaxy about what the Council has really been doing to refugee populations. There was a long pause. Station Manager, you are hardly in a position to make demands. Counselor, Sarah interrupted, I have 3,000 ships from 49 different species all broadcasting this conversation to their home worlds. Right now, billions of beings across the galaxy are listening to you threaten refugees and civilians whose only crime was seeking safety. How do you think that's playing in the galactic media? Through their mental link, Kethvar shared his amusement with Sarah. In 3,000 years of warfare, I have never seen anyone outmaneuver the Council so completely without firing a single shot. The negotiations took 3 days. During that time, ships continued to arrive at Terra 3 as word spread throughout the galaxy about what was happening. The impromptu fleet grew to over 5,000 vessels, representing virtually every species that had been affected by the Great Purge. More importantly, representatives from neutral worlds and even some Council member species began arriving, not as refugees, but as observers and potential allies. The story of Terra 3 had captured the imagination of the entire galaxy, and public opinion was turning decisively against the Council's policies. The final agreement was signed aboard a neutral diplomatic vessel provided by the Andromedan Trade Federation. Terra 3 would be recognized as an independent world with the right to offer sanctuary to any being who requested it, regardless of species or political status. The Great Purge would be officially suspended pending a full investigation by an independent tribunal. And Most importantly, any species that had been targeted for extinction would have the right to establish colonies and rebuild their populations under Terra 3's protection. Kethvar was granted full amnesty in exchange for his cooperation in transitioning former Zephyrian territorial claims to the protection of the new Terra 3 alliance. As Sarah watched Admiral Thexgar's fleet withdraw from Terra 3's space, she felt Kethvar's mental presence touch her mind one final time. "You have accomplished something I thought was impossible," he told her. "You have taken the dream of a broken old warlord and made it reality." What dream? A galaxy where beings help each other not because they're the same species, but because it is the right thing to do. Sarah smiled, looking out at the thousands of ships that remained in orbit around Terra 3, ships that would carry the news of what had happened here to every corner of the galaxy. "It's not my dream, Kethvar. It's all of ours." 1 year later, Sarah stood in the same observation lounge, but Terra 3 had changed beyond recognition. The mining station had grown into a sprawling complex that housed the headquarters of the Galactic Refugee Alliance, the largest diplomatic meeting facility in known space, and the training center for what was being called the first truly multi-species military force in galactic history. Kethvar had recovered enough to take short flights around the planet, his crystalline wings catching the light of Terra 3's sun as he oversaw construction of the memorial to all the species that had been lost to the Purge. He would never be the warrior he had once been, but he had found something perhaps more valuable, a purpose that brought life instead of death. The galaxy had not become perfect overnight. There were still conflicts, still prejudice, still those who believed that might made right. But Terra 3 had proved something important, that cooperation was possible, that differences could be strengths, and that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness could change the balance of power among the stars. As Sarah watched a group of young beings from a dozen different species working together to expand the station's educational facilities, she reflected on how far they had all come. 6 months ago, she had been a simple miner who found a broken creature and decided to help. Now she was the leader of an alliance that spanned the galaxy, and the galaxy itself was a different place because of a simple choice to show compassion to someone who needed it. Sometimes, Sarah thought, the biggest storms really do begin with the smallest gestures. And sometimes that makes all the difference in the universe.